Hey, deserving listeners, Natalia Grace documentary on Max or Discovery. Not sure which one. Let's watch.
And I've been hiding it from you because I don't want you to know. So I asked her, how do you do it? Natalia said she eats it. She said when she goes to the bathroom and there's any there, she wipes it up off her leg and she eats it and licks it so nobody will ever find out.
My God. So, okay. If I was to take a guess, just a guess, given what we've heard, that Christine was forcing Natalia to tell people that she was having her period and was hiding it from others, because by this time Christine really wanted to make sure that everyone thought of her as an adult, so Christine could be let off the hook, so Christine could get rid of her. And she had not only coached her to tell randos, but you got to tell your dad, because that's all part of my plan. I got to convince everyone, including my husband, that she's an adult. And then she, brainwashes the kid, coerces the kid, forces the kid to say, yes, okay, I'll do that, and abuses the kid, says, if you don't do it, I'm gonna get you with the pepper spray or whatever. But either Christine doesn't tell her how to hide it, if she's asked about it, or did tell her something, but Natalia forgot. This is just a guess. Because, you have a hard time believing that Christine would say, okay, if someone asks you, you got to admit that you had your period, even though you haven't. And you have to, if someone asks, like, how do you hide it, you have to tell people that you ate it. Maybe Christine might have said that, but you would imagine that Christine would have a better story that you would want to fabricate. So you can imagine a child who's 6 years old, 7 years old at the time, thinking, I don't even know what we're talking about, but there's supposedly something I'm supposed to be hiding. So what's one way to hide something? Well, I guess I'll just say I eat it. And then he hears that. So it's just another thing. Like, if you hear that and you're the father, it seems like there would be some major follow-up there.
And then she forced me to put the tampon in. And then I literally just told her, I can't do it. It hurts. Christine just kept telling me, you need to put it in. She made me do it, but I couldn't. And she was mad. I remember that. I remember Christine being mad because I couldn't do it. So
there's so many things to say. One, just, yeah, this fits in that category of abuse. There's a lot of behavior as a clinician you hear when you hear about abuse to children. And there's this, I keep referring to this category of abuse that is callous and, I don't know any other word, but psychopathic, where the parent exhibits just complete lack of empathy or regard for another human being. Most of the perpetrators that I have treated of child abuse, they're not psychopathic. They do have empathy. That might sound strange, but many parents who are abusive, they absolutely are capable of love and caring. They have major issues, and their empathy might be impaired at times, but they're not any different than anyone else regarding empathy. And that empathy is reflected in their abuse, because the way that they don't abuse in an empathetic way, but there's a line that they don't cross. And there's a lot of lines, because if you haven't been around this material, there's a lot of lines that you might think, oh my God, that person is so abusive. But if you told that story to me, I'd be like, there's worse than that. And we're hearing behavior. And if you heard the story, you might even think like, well, is it really abusive? I think most of you would, but it's not stereotypical abuse, right? The invasion of everything, not only just her body, but her mind. She has to now believe or tell others, not only that she has mistreated, but that she's older. She's not who she is, right? And the damage, and then this feeling you get from someone that's supposed to have your back. I get the impression that the mom was by far the primary parent, and that Michael worked outside the home, worked a lot, and wasn't around nearly as much as the mom was. So it just sounds really, really awful. And then I think is perhaps because I've been wondering if we believe the neighbors regarding the behaviors, even at just a few of the behaviors that they talked about regarding her trying to have sexual relations with other boys, younger boys, and her propositioning older men. If we believe some of that, then we have to wonder where did that come from? And I was suspecting, in terms of the typical story, is that she was sexually abused at some point, even before she met the Barnetts. Now, she could have been sexually abused by the Barnetts as well, but since I wasn't hearing any data along those lines, it doesn't mean that it's not there. But I was just thinking, it could happen. It could have even happened prior to her remembering, when she's like 2 years old. Who knows? But it's just a huge question mark. There's a possibility that the behavior that was alleged to have happened when she was living in the apartment that the neighbors talked about, that the sexual abuse could literally be only these sorts of things. It doesn't even have to be overtly sexual, but it involves invasion of body. And then you can imagine her, there's just a lot of different possibilities, thinking like, well, maybe I am old. And what do old people do? Well, they have sex with people. So I'm going to, you just can imagine there's a road there. And there's a lot of other roads, but I don't know, I just thought I'd mention it. But this is, just think about how callous. And we have to imagine that Christine knew that she was a child at this point. She's like 6 years old, 7 years old. I mean, it is horrific at any age, but to a little child.
When I was able to take it out, there was blood on it because of the fact that, I'm 7 years old. I'm not even supposed to be having that right now. And she says, see, you had your period. And I couldn't say anything.
Yeah, that is, that's abuse on the highest order. If I were being victimized, I would rather be hit across the face than having something like that happen to me, for sure. Yeah. I wouldn't want to be hit across the face, but I'd rather be hit across the face than something. There's so many layers to that. Again, your body, those parts of your body, your mind is being infiltrated. You're being shown that there is no limit to the invasion and the harm and the brainwashing and the lack of regard. Your whole body, inside and out, is, my playground. I will do what I want and I don't care. That is an awful, awful, awful thing. Have I ever watched anything even close to this on this channel? Now, I'll tell you, this is my world, all therapists, we hear stuff like this all day long, potentially. I've supervised clinicians who work at a local agency that's just north of Seattle. It's called Dawson's Place. Kind of reminds me of like Dawson. I think it's Dawson Place. It's Dawson's Creek. But the agency is a really helpful model of helping people in that they specialize in treating children who have been sexually abused, or maybe it's just abuse in general. And they work in the same building as, government agencies such as the police or DSHS. Because when you have children that have been abused, especially if they're currently in the system, there's a trial date or whatever, or there's an ongoing investigation, then it is often helpful if the therapist works very closely with the Department of Health and Social Services and with police. Now, sometimes as therapists, we don't want to have those open lines of communication because we want to have confidentiality for our clients. But if we want to truly advocate in a holistic way for victims. Sometimes it does require, sometimes the therapist, we go to the police and we say, look, you're going too hard after the kid to extract information so that you can put the perpetrator behind bars, and you got to slow down with this kid because I saw this and that, so sometimes it's you're really advocating for the kid. You're not just outing them, Anyway, so I've supervised a number of clinicians that worked there, and I didn't work there, but I would work with these therapists over many months, years, and I saw firsthand just the toll that it takes, the amount of burnout. And they, at least back when I was doing this kind of work, they had a good culture of self-care at this agency because of just how stressful it was. Because, the typical therapist, they might have one or two of these every day, but not wall to wall. And it can be very overwhelming to the therapist, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. And it starts to erode your hope in humanity. It starts to literally traumatize you because you're visualizing the stories that are being told to you. You're witnessing the trauma, and it's heartbreaking. It's a lot. But the average therapist will hear this frequently, whether it's kids that are describing this or adults that are describing it that they went through when they were growing up. It's and it's our job sometimes to become extremely intimate with those stories, to talk about them repeatedly and get to know them very well, and to ask for more information within exposure therapy. And so for me and people in my field, this story is, it's rough, but it's part of our world, unfortunately, that we're very aware of on a daily basis. But for the public and for this channel, I don't know if we've ever, I can't remember a time where it's been this explicit and this horrific, described by a victim, not just speculated or something or reading a report. It's, a victim is telling us a story that is. So I can imagine this being absolutely triggering to people. So I hope that everyone is monitoring their own traumas if they have them and taking care of themselves, because this stuff would be unbearable for some people for sure. It's hard anyway, right? This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's a new year, so of course it's time for New Year's resolutions. But often, those are just manifestations of internalized harmful voices that tell us we're not good enough. So instead of making a resolution to change something, let's recognize that we are already good enough. Now, most people think of therapy as a place for us to work on our problems, but there are several schools of thought within the field of psychotherapy that adamantly reject that paradigm, like narrative therapy and solution-focused. Instead, these clinicians help us focus on what we're already doing well. And by helping us do that, data shows that we often will gravitate towards more beneficial patterns. Well, one place you can find such therapists is on BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. So celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
The only medical professionals who believed that Natalia was an adult was the family, Dr. McLaren, and a social worker, therapist, Susan Witten. And they were the basis for the application to re-age Natalia.
Susan Witten is a licensed clinical social worker, not a doctor.
Yeah, so, boy, if you listen to my audio podcast or you are one of my supervisees, then you know that I have a big problem with mental health professionals such as myself writing reports in areas that we don't have expertise in or not enough information. It's literally in our ethical codes that we shouldn't be doing things like this, and it just makes sense. We're often asked to do these kinds of things, right? Like a more common scenario is you are, as a therapist, treating a child and you have a relationship with the mother. The mother is the one that brings the kid in, and sometimes you meet with the mother as well. And the mother tells you that the father, there's a custody battle, and the mother says, the father was abusive. and you don't have any reason to be skeptical of that, and you just take the mother's word for it. And maybe there's, well, let's just go. Typically there isn't. It's just a lot of people saying things that might be true. It's not like you just discount it, but you weren't there. So you listen to the mother, and she's saying that, and then maybe even the kid exhibits signs of having been abused. Maybe even the kid talks about having been abused. But in this scenario, let's say that the father was not actually abusive. Typically, that's not the case, but let's just say in this scenario that it is. And over time, you just believe the kid and the mom. The kid might be just saying it because either they're being coached severely, that's not normal, or the memory has been implanted by the mom. You know, the mom might say something like, "Remember that time?" And the kid's like, "Huh?" And then over time, the kid just forms a memory around that. That happens even to adults. And then there is a hearing coming up regarding custody, and there's been more talk, and you're, as a therapist, of course, you're concerned about this kid, this child, and you don't want the child to be abused anymore. Of course, you might call CPS, and let's say there's a whole investigation, but there's not enough evidence, or maybe it's ongoing. Anyway, then the mother comes to you and says, "Okay, we're going to court next week, and I would really like it if you wrote a letter or a report or something to help me, because, you know, we can't have this child live with the father. He's abusive. He's horrible. And if you've been believing everything, which may or may not be true or not, you know, what you're being told, but let's say you're believing everything and you don't understand ethical codes and you don't understand professional roles and you don't understand the standard of practice, which happens a lot, which is why it's explicitly written in some ethical codes, and you write this report and you say positively the child has been abused by the father and here is the evidence. But sometimes they don't even write the evidence. They just say, you know, take it from me. I know that she has been abused, that the child's been abused. And then the mother says, thank you. And you feel good because you're participating in saving this child from the abuse. They go to court, and then people start looking at this assessment, and the lawyers just pick it apart because they're just like, so when did the therapist ever witness abuse? Well, never. Well, then why does the therapist think abuse happened? Well, it's because the mother and the child said so. Well, then why are we even reading this report? It's just a random third person. Now, maybe a therapist can say, I have expertise in detecting signs of abuse, but you know, seeing signs of abuse is not an indication of abuse. Plus, you don't know where the abuse came from, even if it was abuse. Even, you know, if factually we understand that a child has been abused, like they have a big bruise across their face, then we don't know. Unless we were there as a therapist, we can only know what people tell us. And so when we write these kinds of reports, which I recommend people don't do in general, but if you do, you can say, here is, because sometimes we're compelled to write these reports legally. So we say, this person told me this on this date, and this person told me this on this date. And here are some signs of abuse that I have witnessed, but I can't know if abuse happened because I wasn't there. So there's that. So related to this, we have, it sounds like a therapist, a social worker, saying that she knows that Natalia is an adult. How could a therapist evaluate that? That is not within our realm. No one can just look at someone and determine what, and no one can assess someone's psychology even, right? Especially kids who have been abused and have been bounced around from home to home because they might have had to grow up faster than other kids. We all know that. So there's no way to determine. So if someone asked me, even if I strongly suspected that the child was in fact an adult, if they asked me to write a report, I'd say I can't write that report. One, because I'm not impartial, because the child is my client, and two, that's not a competency that a therapist has. You know, we don't have any competency in that area. So it'd be like asking a dentist about your plumbing, right? A dentist doesn't have any professional expertise in that unless they're also a plumber, you know. So, you know, that's what you're supposed to say. But so many therapists don't say that because they want to help. And that's great. You want to help and you care. But there's I hope that it's clear. And I am frequently telling people to keep this in mind because, occasionally I'll have a supervisee that will be asked this. They'll go ahead and write it and send it off, and they don't tell me about it in time for me to say, don't do that, because it can really bite the therapist in the ass because there's potentially an ethical complaint there, a competency complaint. In my made up scenario, the husband that you wrote, or, he's abusive, he can sue you because that's defamation or something along those lines, because you have no basis to say that. You weren't there. You just have people's accounts. To just claim that a crime has been committed that you didn't witness, in your professional opinion, is potentially suable.
Ms. Witten wrote a couple of letters that alleged that.
Okay, we're finally seeing something here. Okay, Natalia and her adoptive parents, Michael and Christine, were seen in my office, December 2011. The Barnetts, I always like these opening statements, by the way. I'm also trying to get supervisees to include this because sometimes they just launch into the thing figuring that the reader will know the context. The Barnetts stated, well, there's an apostrophe there. Barnett stated that Natalia is a threat to others. The Barnetts stated, okay, so that's good. So the Barnetts stated, the parents stated, it should be the parents, stated that Natalia is a threat to others and that she has harmed them to the point of poisoning Christine and creating a clear plan to kill the other members of the home. So that's all good. It's like the parents told me this. That's all I have. She has been given the diagnosis. So Natalia has been given the diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and schizophrenia. Schizophrenia. Wow. Oppositional defiant disorder, yeah. There's a good chance that the criteria were met because it's not a huge threshold to cross, particularly with kids that come from these kind of backgrounds. And it's not a hugely stigmatizing diagnosis. It can be, but I'm not put off by that. Reactive attachment disorder, yeah, absolutely. I talked about that already. Sometimes, though, clinicians will just throw that around for clients that clearly have some kind of attachment disruption and some sort of behaviors around that. They don't actually fit the criteria of reactive attachment because it's very particular. Of all the kids who have attachment injuries, very few of them actually have reactive attachment disorder. And then Natalia has been in St. Vincent Stress Center 3 times and has received other treatment through community psychological consultants and Lennon and Associates, as well as evaluations from Vala Vista. Okay, per the Barnetts. So again, Barnetts told me several mental health professionals have recommended that Natalia be admitted to a residential treatment center or state hospital. Her background information is incomplete at this point. Okay, her background information is incomplete to the point of something. The birth certificate states that she is 8 years old. However, she has full adult something of herself to be at least 18. Okay, so that's better actually, because this is just saying, look, this is what I've been told. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really, really do.